Chuck and I were talking about doing a presentation, maybe going through like the greatest hits of stuff that we've done before. So what I'm going to share with you is kind of a most recent presentation of where we're at. And it's actually a presentation very similar to what we did at the gathering in South California. I'm going to do this one first, and then I'll be back in 2 weeks to do a deeper dive and something more current with how does a post-COVID city respond, or what's the data behind that. But basically, let me just go ahead, Chuck. Do you have a question?
No, I'm just going to say my microphone is hotter than yours, so I'm actually going to mute myself, and this is yours the rest of the time. So anybody listening to Joe can turn up their volume a little bit because you're a little bit lighter than me.
A little low. Okay.
Yep. But I will fade out, and I'll come back in an hour or so when you're done and conclude. So thanks,
Okay,
Joe.
And if my level's too low, just feel free to interrupt and tell me to kick up the volume. So when I talk about cities, oftentimes what I try to do is frame it into a level of cities of past and present. So I have how we have DNA. Personally, I have DNA. So this is how I started my life. This is my trajectory. I want to be my grandfather, whether I like it or not. There's a lot I can't do to change that. Or more importantly, I'm going to be my parents, my dad in specific. So I look at the issues that my dad has and my family has. We're genetically Italian. I can't change that. That's baked within me. But we also have a genetic predisposition to heart disease. So in my life, I have to watch what I eat. I have to exercise. I have to do things to grow differently. So cities are the same way. We have a trajectory and path in how we grow. The background behind me is Rome, Italy. This is a city that's been around for thousands of years. We can learn from this and learn what it's done to grow smartly into the future and what mistakes it's made in the past. So there's a lot of resiliency and understanding failure as well. So there's a lot of lessons I'll go through in the presentation, but basically this is the one takeaway. If we can look at our families and learn from them, we certainly can look to other places and see how they grow. A small town will grow into a future, and it's going to grow with good habits or bad habits, whether you like it or not. So y'all know that I live in Asheville, North Carolina now. I grew up in upstate New York, but Asheville's a wonderful place. It's up in the Smoky Mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains. We have bluegrass music. We're 90,000 people. We have 40 breweries. We drink a lot. And like any quirky little mountain town, we have, men dressed as nuns on tall bikes that eat fire. It's your typical little place, right? Well, it didn't start this way. It actually started this way. This is a shot down Main Street back in the late 1800s, and about 20 or so years after this picture was taken, and this is the same location. So it exploded into a city, and a lot of that was just transit growth that came in through the train system, and we essentially became the second largest city in North Carolina by the time of the Depression. The Depression wasn't kind to Asheville. Asheville was the highest debt per capita of the entire United States, and we just cratered. And we essentially bombed ourselves out. There's a broader history to this, but basically, like every other American city, we basically shuttered our downtown. What's different about Asheville is they had buildings that they just basically mothballed. But these are shots of downtown Asheville from the 1980s, the 1990s. That's a 1996 Chevy Celebrity. But there was this attitude of, we're not urban, that's not who we are, we're different people, we're rural mountain people, we're not urban people. Every community I go to, I get this response from people. There's this confirmation bias that somehow we're not in cities. We're hearing this a lot now with COVID. They're like, oh, pandemics are gonna end urban environments forever. Well, there's an urban environment behind me that's been going on through many pandemics, and will still keep going. And we'll talk about that in the next session. But I worked for Public Interest Projects, so a downtown real estate development firm in Asheville, started by Julian Price. And the role of the company was to basically invest in buildings and businesses. So this is one of the buildings before and after, and this is basically an old hotel that was converted into apartments with some ground floor retail. But my lesson from Public Interest Projects and Pat Whalen, who is my boss in specific, was basically, how do we bring information to people? It's one thing to do real estate development, but we have to get folks to understand why it matters in my community. Why does our development project help you all? And really, if you think about what cities are, they're essentially just a big land production of buildings. The crop is actually buildings, or the architecture of the city. So if you talk to farmers, farmers are always talking in economic terms. And so we should do the same thing as folks that work on cities. So this is one of our buildings before on the left and after. So public interest projects put in retail, office, and residential. The city did the streetscape project. So if it weren't for the public investment in that urban realm, you wouldn't get that urban typology of development, because this type of building is dependent on the pedestrian realm. So thank you, city, for the garbage can, the bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree. And people complained about that as a subsidy on our building, but we took the taxable value from 300,000 to 11 million. So what you get in the community is you get 3,500% more taxes. Do you have a 401k plan that grows by that? So this is how you get more wealth, right? So our development brings you more wealth. Go out and buy 3,500% more garbage cans. We don't care. And people are like, well, Joe, that's not fair. We've got this Walmart at 20 million, which is double the value. Now, if you're to just take it at face value, like, yeah, it is double the value. That Walmart pays $200,000 in property taxes, but it took 34 acres to get there. And our building's on 0.2 acres. So it's really not a fair way of looking at it in an apples to apples way. So when you look at the taxes per acre, this is the taxes per acre of the mixed use building versus the Walmart. Which would you rather have? And sometimes people are like, well, we want the retail taxes. Okay, well, let's look at the retail taxes. We're doing double. Who would have thought? You know, again, apples to apples, you need to do the math on this to see how it works out. This is the residents per acre, they have 0, and then the jobs. So we're producing more taxes, more revenues, jobs, residents, all of that stuff. So if you could grow a crop, what would you grow? Wheat or marijuana? You're going to grow the cash crop, right? So if we know this stuff from a farming standpoint, why don't we take this into the built environment to understand the economics there? And I want you to realize this isn't complex math. We've seen the lesson in Strong Towns with Taco John's. This is how you make an apples to apples analytic. And we do this when we talk about cars, right? We don't talk about cars on a miles per tank basis. Do we? If we did, we'd all be driving Ford F-150s at 650 miles per tank. Instead, we say miles per gallon, the numbers change, and we should all be driving BMW Asettas. So around 2009 or 2010, I presented with Chuck on a CNU panel at the Congress for New Urbanism in Madison, Wisconsin. And my pitch was, do you understand the tax system? Do we, as folks that practitioners in the public realm, do we understand the tax system? And I stood in front of the room and I had my hand in the air and I said, so who understands how your local tax system works? Your millage rates, what you pay to the county versus the city, how property tax assessment works. Who understands that? Who's read the tax policies? And no one raised their hand. And so if you think about it, if we're not literate about these policies, if we're choosing not to read them, we're not going to understand how cities are built. And it's our choice. I mean, I'm trained as an architect. I don't like to read tax policy, but I'm going to look it up. So why does it matter? Well, it matters because it affects how your community grows. And I'll give you an example. So this is breaking down the tax system. This is in Florida. What we showed them was like, all right, you've got your tax system. Here's how North Carolina works. We have a market value. You get a taxable reduction of about 20%. To get your taxable value at 80%, you might do your tax rate and boom, it's a straight line system. In Florida, it's a little bit more complex. You have, and this was for Alachua County, which is home to Gainesville. The city gets 4 mills, the county gets 8 mills. So I asked them, I said, do you get 2 times the service out of your county for your city? Because you're paying 2 times the taxes. This is the city tax, this is the county tax. So folks inside Gainesville are paying 8 mills to the county, 4 mills to the city. That means they're paying double to the county. That's just math. So their total millage rate is 12.7. Now, Florida has some interesting exemptions. Every state does. But in Florida, you get no exemptions if you're commercial or non-primary residential. If you're primary residential, you get $25,000 off the top of your value as a homestead, just because you're awesome and you're a homeowner. And they thought that was so great, they gave you a second one. So that's $25,000. So now on $100,000 of value at commercial, you're still $100,000, and at residential, you're $50,000. That's a tax break, just so you know. Now, I didn't know that Florida was having a hard time getting retirees to move there, but they get an additional $25,000 if you're old. That's a bonus. That's also called a tax incentive. Just be aware of it. Now, what's crazy is they have this other thing that they've adopted that's pretty much like California's Prop 13. And we see this, there's probably about, I want to say about 25 or so states that have adopted different restrictions on growth of revenue, which is kind of silly. But Florida's is kind of insane. They capped growth of residential at 10% and stops. So you can go up 10%. Residential is down to 3% or CPI, which is ever lower. So basically, your growth can go no more than 3% or inflation, which is ever lower of the two. I was presenting this in Florida, and one of the planners was like, well, that's great. People can stay in their houses. And I'm like, okay, can you afford your government? You know, and I understand that you're giving these gifts away, but is it really the taxes that are driving people out of their houses, or is it the cost of your community? So when you look at the residential growth, it's restricted at a third of what commercial is. So you're also putting the onus of the tax gains on that commercial property. And what are they going to do? You know, most commercial property owners are passing that off onto their tenants anyway, because they have, it's a cost of their buildings. But here's what's going on in the market. And so if you see, this is looking at what's going on at the last boom, and you can see this huge gap. And it feels good if you restrict your growth of revenue down to here as the market takes off. But after you crater and your market value just hits the floor, it can only climb out of the basement at 3% or CPI, which is ever lower of the two. Meanwhile, the market takes off, right? So the market takes off again. So what happens when your value is restricted down to here? So your revenues are capped down there, but the market's going up here. What's going on with the price of concrete, the price of labor, the price of gasoline? Is it following the blue line or the red line? It's following the blue line. So when you've restricted your revenue, if your growth is going at a different rate, that's going to be a gap that you can't catch up in. So as the ironic thing here is, as markets recover in Florida and a lot of these places that restrict the growth, Oregon, California, Michigan, parts of New Hampshire, as you do that, you're essentially locking your city into a death spiral where they can't keep up with the cost of their community because the costs and revenues are disassociated. And it's the taxes that pay for stuff. You need to understand how the tax flow happens so you can pay for things. So back to Asheville for a second, we didn't get new buildings in our downtown until 2008. So this growth in value all happened with buildings that were just sitting around. So that value of $500 million was sitting there. Now the city led by putting in infrastructure and all that stuff, and then people reacted. There's this guy, Chris Peterson. I love Chris, but these are some of his campaign ads from the 1990s. And here he is complaining about municipal investment. And, you know, in a way, he's right. $26 million of investment. That $26 million is a lot of money. I don't have 26 million bucks, but let's do some math here. If you invest $26 million on a $100 million asset and it grows to 500, is investing 26 and yielding $430 million. Isn't that a good return on investment? Yeah. So as we do projects, there's good bets and there's bad bets. This is a good bet. This is a good investment in your community. And you're also probably not going to stop Chris with data. You're not going to win every argument. And Chris has a website now with fire and brimstone. This is the mayor here. I asked the mayor, I said, is that a liquor drink? She goes, it should be. You know, it's like Chris is going to go on with this stuff. That's fine. You can't reach everybody. But what we're missing is a broader civic conversation. I found this book in a garage sale. And it's the city, the town, and the country. It's a teacher's guide. This is a book from 1959, and it's a third grade textbook. So this is a book on civics. In grade school or kindergarten, you learn about your house. First grade, the school. Second grade, the neighborhood. Third grade, you learn about regional planning. Did y'all do that when you were in third grade? And what I love about this book is it says things like this. While patterns vary from state to state, counties are responsible for education, library, health, welfare, etc. In studying the functions performed by your county, you'll no doubt find there's a duplication of services and overlapping of jurisdictions and a lack of coordination between the county and the communities within it. Did y'all have that problem? You know, we have situations where here in Asheville, this one commissioner said to me as they were plowing a highway into a poor Black neighborhood, we're making this decision for the citizens of the county, not the citizens of the city. And this is 2009. And I'm like, really? Yeah, those are county residents. I mean, there's a disconnect about this government that we're all in together, in this loss of civics in the discussion. In this book, this is, you know, straight out of the 1950s. It's one of those Dick and Jane kind of looking books. It's painfully white. It's also misogynistic. The girls are shoved in the hallway for some reason. But and you read about this factory that gets built, and there's even more kids that go to school, right? So in blue, this is what you ask your third graders. As a third grade teacher, give 4 good reasons for building a new school. And your third graders talk about what? Equity, everybody should have a desk, all of that stuff, right? On the right-hand side, you read about Mr. Canfield. He didn't want a new school. He says, our taxes are too high now. If we build a new school, we'll need more teachers and everything else, and we'll have to pay still higher taxes. That's indeed true. So you ask your third graders up here in blue, why would some people have to pay higher taxes? You know, it's like, we need to understand that there's a cost of society and there's a revenue stream, and they have to match. And there are people that are going to resist paying more taxes, and that's a legitimate complaint. But we need to understand where the costs and the revenues are and match them up. And what I find with a lot of our conversations, back to the teacher's guide section, it says here, remember too that many children, whether urban and rural and regardless of region, are tragically limited in their knowledge of their world, and their world's largely the space in which they live and operate. You know, we are all tragically limited in our understanding of our own cities, that people know how they communicate through a city, where they drop their kids off at school, how they get to work. You know, if there's a disturbance in that, all of a sudden it's the mayor's problem, right? So the city is basically a really big real estate development project that we're all partners in. And in my case, my city has a finite boundary of land. We essentially have a growth boundary that was imposed on us by the state. And that's what we have. So we're very much like Oregon or something, unintentionally. But so that area is just a larger real estate development corporation. So if Public Interest Projects is a $15 million investor, it's investing in a downtown that's a valuation, and also a city and a county and a state, for all that matter. And you look up the word incorporated, it says to constitute a company, a city, or other organization as a legal corporation. It's not just your city, it's your county is incorporated, your state's incorporated, our country is incorporated. Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert show in 2016, and I'm such a nerd, I looked it up. This is the US code for any of the legal nerds in the room right now, that we're listed as a federal corporation. So Asheville at $13 billion, $13.8 billion is 6 times the value of Ted Turner. If, you know, does Ted Turner just make his choices based off what's on Facebook? Of course not. So my city council shouldn't be doing that either. Then we need to understand the cash flow of this thing and how it all operates. So we've done this all across the country, multiple different states, different countries, New Zealand, Canada. And when you mash up everybody's numbers, this is what you see. For every dollar of taxes somebody out in the county is paying to the county, their brother and sister in the city is paying about 5 times that. Then you have your Walmart, your mall, and then this is a 2-story building. This could be Driggs, Idaho, Durham, North Carolina, or Dallas. As soon as you start stacking stories, you're stacking your dollar bills. This is a 3-story building, and that's a 6-story building. So you're seeing the potency rise as you go up. And I'm not talking skyscrapers either. Now, what's funny is some people say to me, they're like, Joe, what's your problem? Why do you hate Walmart? Why are you always picking on Walmart? If you're thinking that, you're missing the point. This isn't, I use Walmart because it's just a standard of the typology of a box. But I presented at actually Chuck and I presented at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers back in 2013 or 12 or so. And then I followed this guy to catch his second presentation in 2014. And he was the keynote speaker at the Assessors Conference. And it was kind of an amazing presentation. He presented spreadsheet after spreadsheet on how cheap his buildings are. And what's kind of wild is he showed how cheap the buildings are. And I was blown away. I was like, seriously? Like, this is amazing. He's walking into one room and getting all of his property tax bills lowered in one meeting. That's efficient. Now think about it for a second. The assessors are agnostic. They don't care about they don't create value. The value is created in the marketplace. They're just documenting it and taxing you on it. So don't hate the player. You know, it makes every sense in the world for Walmart to go in and argue for a lower tax bill. So I went in and asked him, went up to the microphone. I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he unapologetically shot back. He said, 15 years, maybe 20 years. We're designing the building to depreciate it as fast as possible. We'll build another building and depreciate it down again. We don't care about the buildings. They last 15 years. They're throwaway, maybe 20, but we're not building the buildings for a long-term investment. So again, don't hate the player, hate the game. If you build a tax system where you're taxed on value, there's a perverse incentive to build junk in your community. That's the investment model that we're all sitting on. And just be literate about it and make sure that you're getting a good investment. If a 15-year investment's good for you, I mean, that's the life cycle of, that's the life cycle of a cat. We at least mourn the passing of a cat. So just be aware of that. Now, I see in the chat that somebody asked about sales tax data in North Carolina. North Carolina does not allow us to get the tax data. They used to back up until 2010, and then just got rid of it. I can get it in South Carolina, Minnesota, progressive places like Alabama, but North Carolina, no way, Jose. Certain states do that. In Georgia, same deal. They just don't let you look at it, which is super weird. One point of advocacy that we could all do is that we need to mandate that our states give us the access to the information. But for Walmart, you can just pull it off their annual reports, that they report it internally in their own document, so you can get it there. So why aren't people seeing this stuff? Why don't people ask these questions? And a lot of this it's just how we communicate the information. So if I can communicate what's going on in your brain with technology, I can show you your creative thought process in green versus your brainstem activity in blue. Can I do an economic MRI of your place? So we're known for these graphics of communicating macroeconomic activity in three-dimensional form. And a lot of this is to give people an idea of the scale of change through it. So let's go back to Asheville for a second. So this is my county, 350 square miles of it. This is a big non-taxable area called Mount Mitchell. This is a non-taxable area called Mount Pisgah. So both of those are parks. They're not giving me taxes, so I don't care about it, right? I've got low value in green. I've got high value in purple, right? So this is low value. This is high value. This is the Biltmore estate. It's worth $100 million. That's super potent. One house and a hotel. But, it's not a fair way of looking at it, because the house is 180,000 square feet house on 8,000 acres of land. So it's got the biggest gas tank. It's going to be the most valuable, right? So rather than total value, let's do value per acre to understand productivity. And I'll just show it to you in 3D. So now we can see what the scale of the model, you can see how potent different parts of the community are. You can see where downtown Asheville is, and I don't even have to label it. But we can also see our little sister of Black Mountain, which is about 12,000 people. We can see its downtown, like Baby Bear, and this is Mama Bear. We can see what's going on. And we can see how different things work. Now, in defense of my cousins that live out in Fairview, they think they're paying a lot of taxes here because they pop up relative to everybody else around them. And that's indeed true, but they have no idea what we're paying in the downtown because no one's ever shown it to them. So a lot of this is you want to do visualizations so that people can see it in the data. You don't just tell people this is what's happening. You need to make it in a way that people can understand it and see the information. And that's why we advocate graphic presentations, geospatial modeling, and all of that. And sometimes the reactions for people is, that's North Carolina, California is different. Well, here's California, so you can see what's happening. Here's Santa Rosa. And again, this is even with Prop 13 and other perversions in their tax system. You can see where downtown is. This is Kansas City. You can see where downtown Kansas City is. You can see the streetcar suburb with a little micro downtown of Country Club Plaza behaving very similar to the main downtown. This is Manchester, New Hampshire, Bozeman, Montana, even Brevard, North Carolina, which is like 7,000 people. You can see downtown in all of these models. There's retail questions. Again, Minnesota, super awesome place for data. Minnesotans are amazing. So here's Minneapolis's or Hennepin County's model, and you can see downtown Minneapolis. But Josh McCarty was doing the analysis for the retail, and here's the retail model. So this is just retail productivity, no property tax productivity, but here's the retail production of Mall of America, a monolithically retail environment, the biggest mall in the country. And I was asking Josh, I was like, where's downtown? And he's like, it's up over here. So who would have thought that downtown Minneapolis is producing this while Mall of America is producing that? So downtown Minneapolis is 4 times the potency of 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 uh, the Mall of America. That's math. Sometimes we get things like this. This is Redlands, California. This was a lot of fun. I asked everybody what that little spike was right there, and everybody immediately assumed it was the biggest building downtown. And I was like, well, that's not it. It's actually this thing. So who would have thought that a 2-story building is more tax productive? But look at the numbers, 20 million versus 6 million. That's a big difference. We found this little weird little thing here, just glued onto the side of a building. Incidentally, that building was built out of spite because the property owner's land was taken for a road, and the municipality only gave them 7 feet of land back. So he was like, well, I'm going to build a building with it. So that building is, if you had 3 acres of it, it would equal the 13-acre Walmart. Now, what city would you allow a 7-foot wide building? Why not? But in most cases, from a zoning perspective, somehow that's dangerous to have a 7-foot wide building. I don't know why, but we have these arbitrary measures inside our zoning codes all over the place. But taking 1 block of downtown and doing retail plus property tax, you need 18 acres of total building to equal the total taxes of revenue and property tax of the 120-acre building on the right. What's crazy about Redlands is just what they tore down. All that stuff on the right-hand side of this is gone, replaced by a downtown mall or surface parking lots or whatever. And you think about the humans. I mean, these people had wild technology called horses, and they built amazing buildings like this. This building's torn down. President Taft spoke here. President Roosevelt had been here. And now it's a Stater Brothers grocery store at $500,000 of value per acre. It's insane what we do. And there's a cost to this. So they had a mall downtown. So we went ahead and Josh pulled this old map from the Sanborn map, and we're able to figure out what they tore down. And so basically Josh brought them back to life like Frankenstein and said, what would be the value today if you just rebuilt these buildings? So here's what we currently have. The mall is like $6 million for total site value. If it were in great shape, it'd probably be 9, maybe. But here's what they threw away. So basically you could do a measurement and say, well, here's what you got rid of. You basically threw away $15 million of value. That was a choice. Basically to underbuild is a tax break. To build less, to build a less worthwhile building is a tax break. So just be aware of that. Is that what you intend to do with your taxes? Just make sure you have that discussion. Lots of times it's just obviously the denser the building, the bigger the building, the more potent. I got it. But you don't need to just have big buildings. So this is one of our favorite studies. This is Charleston, South Carolina. This is the 3-county metro. And when I was presenting, I was like, look, you can't claim the ocean value because you didn't make the ocean. But obviously beachfront property is going to be worth a lot of money, but we just went ahead and erased it just to get them to see the human created city. Now, what's funny is, or not funny, interesting, awesome actually, is that Charleston's an old place. It predates the Declaration of Independence. I have a birth date at, July 4th, 1776. So just grabbing all the buildings that predate the Declaration of Independence, buildings like this is a building built in 1686. It's the Red Dot Liquor Store. It's the oldest liquor store in the country. There's a revolutionary getting his drink on. Just grabbing all of those old buildings. Here they are in plan. So about 21 acres of buildings that are there that are older than our country. This is what they paid in county taxes. So they paid a city tax on top of that and a business improvement district tax on top of that. But this is just what the county got, right? Out in the county is a Walmart that's basically the same acreage, and this is what it paid the same year. So those downtown buildings are 13 times the potency. They've survived fires, hurricanes, half a dozen wars, an earthquake, and they're still producing this value. So let's just make sure that our value sets of what we hold dear are matched in our financial system. Or if you want to have a throwaway building, at least make sure that you can afford it and run the numbers on that, because this building is going to be gone by 2030, 2025. So it's producing a low level of value and then it just disappears. Those other buildings don't behave that way. Or let's align our tax system to make sure that we're rewarding these old buildings versus taking away from them. The investment value should go back into those areas that are producing the most wealth for us that way. So lots of times it's like, all right, Joe, that's great, but we don't want density. My community doesn't want density. Our favorite project to exhibit this behavior is Gwinnett County, Georgia. Gwinnett County, Georgia is down near Atlanta. Lawrenceville is the county seat. I had never heard of Lawrenceville before I went down there, but we always get people's biases. They tell us their biases before we go down. And in this case, the community said to us that there were some words that I wasn't supposed to use. And I hear this from a lot of people that I might offend the crowd or do something. And the 4 words that I wasn't allowed to say are urban. I couldn't say urban, city, town, or municipal. That these were dangerous words in Gwinnett County. And I obliged. I don't, but it's kind of awkward when your company's called Urban 3. Like, am I just like 3 now? Like, what am I going to say? But I just played along. But I talked to my client and I was like, Kelly, look, y'all are 812,000 people. You're big. And she goes, yeah, but honey, look, we're outside the Beltway. We're not part of the municipality of Atlanta. We're rural. We're outside the Beltway. We're 460 square miles. We're huge. Okay. Well, I can do math. So you divide 812,000 people into 460 square miles. That's 1,900 people per square mile. That's the density of their community. They're less dense than DeKalb. DeKalb has Decatur and part of Atlanta in it. But we had all of this other data. So we just made a really simple graphic to show them. We're like, all right, so you're denser than these places. So you're 200 people per square mile denser than Mecklenburg, North Carolina. What's in Mecklenburg? And then the audience, somebody just goes, Charlotte? And I was like, yeah. You got 200 people denser than Mecklenburg. You didn't produce a Charlotte. I never heard of Lawrenceville. I've heard of Charlotte. Davidson County, Tennessee is home to Nashville. Both of these 2 places have professional football teams. There's no such thing as the Gwinnett County Cowboys. Like, what did you all do? This is Austin. You're double the density of Austin. This is Raleigh. This is Asheville. This is Chapel Hill, North Carolina. That's what rural looks like. So when we did their model, Josh turned it on its side so you could see it horizontally. It looks like a 1970s shag carpet. It's like the same thing all the way across the model. That's what they got. That was the intention of their policy in everything they did, by following biases and histrionics and not following data. The reason why I was freaked out is this is what we typically see. And inside the model, I can see places, and I can also see their downtowns. I got downtown, and I can see some new urbanism over here. The physical form of the model shows us what's going on physically inside the city through the financial system. I didn't know what to make of this. So the most potent building in their community, this little red spike right here, is this thing. That's it. Your great grandparents left you that. You haven't done anything that's more potent than that. $8 million an acre is the most potency that you've built inside this place over this last something years. That's all you got. So here you are stacked up. You have that value. All these places are less dense, and they're cleaning your clock and value. So how is that? And so you've made biased choices in what you assume your market is. So you haven't allowed that urban product to come in because you said that people don't want it. It's scary. It's dangerous. Well, there's a part of your market that will choose that. At least 25% of your market wants that kind of stuff or would live in it. I'm not saying everybody in this room needs to live in an urban environment. There are people that want that, things like this. And in a lot of Sunbelt places, the West Coast, you just never had that history of townhouses. But this is Boston. Is this stuff unlivable? Are people not wanting to live here? Is this dangerous? Is it not valuable? This one townhouse right here is $161 million an acre for a 4-story building. $161 million an acre. Y'all are topping out at 8. That's your choice. So just for fun, we made an economic heart monitor and put the 3 counties at the same scale side by side, and we pulsed out their valuation to show them the economic results of their choices. So Davidson County is peaking out at 192 million. Austin County or Travis County, which is Austin, is peaking out at 476. And in Lawrenceville, you're flatlining at 8. These are your choices. Again, it's people are making choices. They need to be informed on what's the result of those choices and make sure that you can afford it. And lots of times people are like, we have plenty of money. We're doing great. So, we did this project with Chuck in Lafayette, and Strong Towns has written extensively about this. Also in the book, let's see if this will show up here, so we went down, Chuck was bringing information on the cost side, the engineering side, what the value is. We were bringing the revenues. What was crazy when we were doing the analysis, Carly, this assistant city manager, gave us these documents. And I'm not making this up. This is the cover of the budget document from 1994. Do you need to even read the document to understand what's going on with the parish in this situation? So that the government's going down in their onesie and getting hit by a tsunami and eaten by a shark. Now, the council just ignored the information or just chose to kick the can down the road. The next year, the finance officer's like, we're still screwed. And the third year, they did this joint city-county government. So we come in 20 years later, and they're still broke. It's like, well, what choices did you make to change your behavior? Or did you just continue the same behavior and hope for a different result by bringing in somebody else's revenue, which is what they did. So they basically fought Mother Nature. Stretching out into the swamps is super expensive. But here's the whole parish, their county. This is downtown. This is some new urbanism. It's something called River Ranch. And they generally just spread out into super expensive areas to drain. The stormwater system and the roads are what's killing them. And the pavement in particular, we had to come up with a network distribution model to figure out how people use the roads and then turn around and send them a bill for those choices. So you want to choose to live way out here on this cul-de-sac right there. Well, great. You're going to pay for that entire cul-de-sac and a piece of the whole entire system. It's basically network math. And a lot of this is by using the trip counts that are coming through the traffic model. Now, as we're talking geospatially about this, one of the counselors issued this press release saying this. It's not where you live. It's what you believe. What does that even mean? I believe I look like Brad Pitt. But sooner or later I got to walk by a mirror and see this, and that's not Brad Pitt. So I get data, right? It's not about what I believe. It's about the information that's out there. The public works director, Kevin Blanchard, super awesome guy. This is sort of his response. There's no such thing as an infrastructure fair. And he basically said, look, we've got $250,000. That's what's in the budget. We can chip and seal maybe a quarter mile somewhere in the county. Y'all get to choose, but that's all the money that we have. There's no infrastructure ferry that's going to bring us more money. That's it, which is super awesome. So we photoshopped Kevin in on this. But as Chuck and I were interviewing people, what is burned into my mind is we did like 2 days worth of interviews, and we interviewed the public works or the finance officer. And inside the CAFR standards, we're talking with Lori, and roads and pipes are listed as assets. So we asked her, like my computer is an asset. If I had delivery vehicles, those are assets. If I had a hot dog stand or real estate, those are assets. And we're, talking through, she's like, well, that's a CAFR standard. We're just following the CAFR standard. And I said, Lori, I can sell you my computer, my truck, my building. Can you pick your roads up and sell them to Baton Rouge? And she goes, well, no. And Chuck goes, that's a liability. And she goes, well, but our CAFR standards, and we're just like, look, no one's going to show up from the GFOA and give us a demerit if we actually cash flow you how you're actually operating. We're not going to follow those standards because those standards are hiding your ability to see your true liability. Your true liability is the thing that's in red. This is what you owe on all of your roads, and blue is what you actually have for cash flow. So let me ask you a super complex municipal finance question. Do you have enough blue to pay for your red? Now, the scary thing is, like a lot of cities, their liability is 18 times their revenue coming in, and they start taking out bonds. Well, when you take out a bond, the bonding company has right of first refusal on all of your money that comes in. So they're skimming off the top, $25 million. So you really only have $25 million to pay for your, let's say 30 million to pay for your $1 billion of liability. So this is the reason why you're not keeping up with your maintenance. You just don't have the money. So we sent, this is floating the whole city in a lake, and we sent everybody a bill for what their cost is of municipal investment, stormwater, streets and sidewalks, pipes, all that kind of stuff, the physical hard stuff. And green is the revenue that's coming out of the ground. And this is not just the day-to-day maintenance. This is the obligated debt that you owe on this stuff as well. So netting your costs against your revenue, what's in the black versus what's in the red, here's the whole parish, the whole county in 3D. And if you take this thing and slap it on the floor so everything pops up vertical, this is what you get. So we just did this as a graphic to explain. And actually, I want to commend a Strong Towns reader actually sent us a version of this as colorblind model, which is super awesome. So for those that are colorblind on the call, this is green is net positive, blue is net negative, or this is for folks that can that don't have the color impairment. But you can see how negative this stuff is compared to how positive this stuff is. And their reaction was obvious. They're just like, well, Joe, people really want to live out here. And I said, well, yeah, that's what you're paying people to move out there. That's called a subsidy. When somebody's not paying their costs, that's a subsidy. And we're not making that choice for you. That's your choice in your community. Just write it down and make sure that you can afford it. And a lot of people don't even look at the stuff that's hiding in plain sight. Like these are just their numbers off a Sanborn map. They had 34,000 people in 1950, 5 feet of pipe per person, at 2.4 fire hydrants per thousand. And they grew their population to 121,000. This is their feet of pipe per person today in their fire hydrants per thousand. That's tremendous growth in infrastructure. So a 350% growth in liability or population, 1,000 and 2,000% growth in liability. So your population's grown this much, your liability's grown this much, right? Let's do it that way so you can see me on the screen. Now the reaction was we got rich, and they did. They actually grew their wealth. They were poor. Adjusted for today's dollars, they were $28,000 per household back in the day, and they grew their wealth to about 45,000. So they're actually richer than we are here in Asheville, but that's only 160% growth in revenue. So your wealth, your personal wealth has gone up 160%. Your liability has gone up 1,000 and 2,000%. That's just not going to work out. And it's just, this is the illusion of wealth that Chuck talks about. This is where you think you're growing, but it's not good long-term results, and they're broke. So, lots of times it's just like, oh, that's just crazy people in Louisiana. Like, no, this happens all over. We see this is Lancaster, California. This team of people here in Lancaster, they're doing awesome things in their city, and they realize what they're up against. So we measured their revenue model. They're up and over the mountain from Los Angeles, at the edge of the Mojave Desert. Here's their revenue model. But was in going through and looking at their costing side, one of the things that became sort of a sticking point was the amount of roads that they have. They have 953 miles of roads, which is basically they're paving a road from Los Angeles to Portland. Every 50 years, they have to rebuild that road to Portland. Could you imagine if that was our capital campaign that we did as part of our road projects in all of our cities? So we're building a road to Portland. You probably wouldn't do it. But this death by 1,000 cuts that happens in all of our development models, we don't see it because we're making micro decisions on a daily basis without seeing the long-term effect. So here's all of their roads laid out as sort of a timeline when they were built. So Josh McCarty pulled an estimate. Now this is just trying to get an idea of when these roads were built. So this is not completely 100% accurate, but it's as close as we can get. You can see that their great-grandparents went on a little road building spree in the early 1900s, and then everybody went to sleep until World War II. After World War II, their grandparents came back from the war and went a little crazy. And you can see in 1953, the lane miles that they built in that 1 year, a lot of roads. Now they were growing on the side of an Air Force base. Things were good. The American economy was booming. They built all that infrastructure. Well, guess what? This comes back to haunt your parents' generation with the first rebuild. You have to rebuild those roads. Now, when your parents are hit with that huge capital cost, what are they inclined to do? Well, most governments, you've got to go out and get more money to pay for the stuff that you just have to repair, right? So there's usually you let out more development. You maybe annex more land to get more tax base. Well, that's going to bring with it more roads. So then you got to build your road again, the second rebuild, and it brings along with it the new stuff that you just built. So stopping them in 2016 and saying you're not building another road from here to infinity, this is what the build-rebuild cycle looks like. We have to build and rebuild this stuff. You're on this treadmill whether you like it or not. Once the developer gives you that road, you're stuck with it. Again, a lesson from Strong Towns about the cost, the long-term obligated cost of the infrastructure. So that first wave, no one tested that experiment out. We just went ahead and did it in 1950. Changed our world. Well, you bought a lot of infrastructure in that gamble. And then we went ahead and just replaced it, did the exact same habit in the 1980s. And now it's starting to compound on itself and get bigger and bigger. So I'm not adding any other roads, but you can see how it's adding up. And this isn't taken into consideration. Do we all think the price of futures of asphalt and concrete is going to get cheaper in the future? Of course not, especially with depleting oil reserves that go to asphalt, all that stuff. So this stuff is going to be more of a problem in future generations, and we're already having our heart attack now. So simply put, flushing their money through their street system, just to give them a graphic, green is what you can afford and red is what you can't. So you can only afford half your road system. City after city across the country is going through this stuff. The older places, the places that aren't growing, where you're not adding more people, you're seeing this first. We're having this problem. We've bought into a model hoping for a better future, and we're paying the cost now for these bad decisions in the past. And again, it's not their fault. They were just thinking it could all work out. No one was running the math on this stuff. South Bend, Indiana is doing some amazing stuff. We worked with Mayor Pete's team to do their revenue model. And what was kind of eye-opening to us is they're not really growing in population, but they're really curious about what they have. They wanted to know about their pipes. So this is their city, just showing you the pipe growth. On the left is their population growth. This is them adding people. Their apex year, their best year ever was 1963. That's when they lost Studebaker and Packard, and they lost their manufacturing. Their population took a hit, and they basically flatlined in population. On the right is an animated chart of their pipes going in the ground since the 1800s. And here they are adding people, adding pipe. It's growing out, seems reasonable. And then I'll drop a boundary when their population stops right about here. So how is it in a community where you're not adding more people, why would you add more infrastructure? And what they're doing is it's a habit. They're in this cycle of this is what people want. They want to stretch out. It's like, well, you can't afford that. You're adding more pipe, which is you're shifting your population from inside to outside and doubling down on your infrastructure. So you might get a near-term gain on new revenues in taxation, but you're picking a lot more liability in your pipes. So blue is their pipe growth, indexed against the red is their population. And this is showing them like how much more pipe are you adding on less people. So were your grandparents camels that they could live with so much less infrastructure than you guys today? Because that's kind of crazy. They have enough pipe to go from South Bend to our office in downtown Asheville. That's a lot of pipe. And I understand this is super depressing. There is a way out. Lots of folks like Eugene, Oregon, they're looking at this stuff. This is Eugene's model, looking from the side view of the revenues above, the costs below, netting it out, what you get net positive versus net negative. This is the top of the model. If you lift this up like you're looking for a salamander under a rock, this is the bottom side. And you could see that spread of costs across the whole model. And again, it's a uniform subsidy across the model. Will Dowdy from the planning department there, the whole team there, Chad, and they're all awesome. They basically wanted us to break down the building types to get a better understanding of them. So we made a big study, but this is the roll up, and I want to credit Will with this. We call it the Brady Bunch slide. But how do we break it down into some simple typologies? We have residential across the top in low, medium, and high density, mixed use, low, medium, high, commercial, low, medium, and high. And here's the sticker prices. So basically the average single family house in Eugene is subsidized, a detached house, at about $1,400 an acre. This is not a surprise. This is not new math. This isn't crazy. And in fact, what's insane about this is it's not even new. The Nixon administration published this in the type stuff in the Cost of Sprawl in 1973. This is the choice that you make when you buy into that system. And do it, but make sure you write this stuff down and you can understand it. And I understand the reaction from many people in the audience now is going to be like, well, Joe, but I want a house. It's like, well, that's cool, but you really shouldn't be doing 80% of your land use is that subsidy. So to take the idea of the transect, you just don't do one section of the transect for 80% of your land use. You've got to balance it out a little bit. So you might want to just slow down on the housing, single family detached housing for a little bit, and maybe try to do other things just for maybe 5 years or something, just to kickstart something else to build some wealth. So if you go back to the model, yes, build some stuff in your downtown. You're going to do great there. But also look for ways to do other sub-regional stuff. Like this is the Crescent Village up here on the top of the model. You can see that little bump that you get. So whatever happened there, replicate it. Maybe do 4 more of those somewhere. And then realize that there's incentives baked into your system that are driving you broke. So there's lots of things that are making the choices to a suburban pattern that are undermining your system. This is one of my favorites. This is taking the buildings off the land and just showing the dirt value per acre. So there's no buildings in this image. This is Cheyenne, Wyoming. And you expect the dirt to all be the same value out for this neighborhood, right? That seems reasonable. Everybody's blue, everybody's 15,000. But you can see in this neighborhood, you see these wild disparities. That could be human error, bad policy, a bad calculation, whatever, but this isn't fair. But more importantly, what's going on here on the commercial corridor? This is all the same zoning district, the same police district, fire district, school district. Why are these numbers? This is 15,000 an acre. When you cross the street, it doubles to 40,000. How does land double in value when you cross the street? And when I presented this, the tax assessor raised her hand, and she's like, no, you don't understand. And I'm like, what am I missing? She goes, well, they have more land. The more land you have, the lower the value. That's our standard. And I said, okay, does that work with any other limited commodity? If I get a bigger diamond, is the bigger diamond cheaper than a smaller diamond? Or if I have a bigger brick of gold, is it cheaper than a smaller brick of gold? And she goes, no, that's not our standard is with land. The bigger the parcel, the lower the value. And I said, all right, I've got 3 miles of infrastructure around this property. This fellow's got 200 feet. She goes, we don't count infrastructure as part of the valuation. I said, so your money into the ground, you don't want it back. And she goes, no, it's not part of our standard. So the reason why we started going to assessors conferences was to ask them, like, their magazine is called Fair and Equitable. And Chuck and I were there. We asked them, like, how is this fair and how is this equitable? And the response was awesome. They're like, it's not. They're like, where did this come from? Did Moses deliver this to you? And they're like, we don't know. Talk to Larry. So we tracked Larry Clark down in the hallway. Larry's awesome. By the way, Larry thought this joke was funny. And he's like, well, now that you point that out, it's not fair. It's not equitable. It's just going to take a while to get through the system. We need to change that. And I asked him, I said, where'd this come from? He's like, I don't know. Probably something in the 1700s when we came across the ocean. A lot of our tax policies transferred from England to here. Maybe this was due to agricultural purposes, but now that you point that out, yeah, that's not fair. So this is baked into our system, and it's going to steer the market and how it chooses things. And this is through lots of different policy choices and actions. So Peoria, Illinois, they told us they had a parking problem. So here's their downtown, here's their water, here's their grass, here's their streets and sidewalks, here's their surface parking, here's their buildings. Of these buildings, these are all parking garages. So it doesn't look like you got a parking problem. It looks like you got a perception problem or maybe a walking problem. I don't know, but you've got plenty of parking. Now, when you build this, and these are their numbers, the average Peorian, she's got 1,200 square feet of buildings dedicated to her and about 900 square feet of parking, 2.5 parking spaces per person in Peoria County, which is insane. Now, when this gets built, this is the sticker price. So the assessor goes out and puts a value on the building and a value on the parking. Right there, you can see the subsidy. The parking is what is that? 27 times less value than the building. The cost of the infrastructure is going to be the same in front of the building and in front of the parking. So if your cost is the same, yet your revenues are different, that's a subsidy. So make sure you write that down. Just for fun, we took the taxes and threw them into a bucket. 2% of taxes off that building and threw it into a savings bucket to pay for the road, and 2% of the parking and put it into a bucket to pay for the road. How long would it take it to catch up to $22? Well, it'd take 32 years for that building to pay off the street, which is good because the road's going to last 50 years. But the parking lot's going to take 786 years. Now, there is no road that lasts 786 years. So this is how you're getting into the system. And so when you look at a model and you see that it all drops off around the downtown, it's not a surprise to us because there's a lot of parking around there. When you go out to the burbs and see how flat they are, it's because there's a lot of parking. So doing the whole county this way, I'm just going to jump ahead here. This is the amount of buildings they have for the whole county. If you just shove them together into a square, that's all you need for all the buildings in the entire county if they were all cheek to cheek. Now, people are like, well, Joe, look, we're not Italians here. We don't like to live so close to each other. You want to be spread out a little bit. So, okay, that you're going to need parking for that. And you're also going to need roads. That's a liability. So here's your buildings, your parking, your roads, and then here's the values of all of them. Let me do it on a per square mile basis. So about $1 billion a square mile out of buildings, about 40 million of the parking, and your roads are costing you 250 a square mile, and this is everything else. So here's a couple of questions. If we know who's using the roads, that would be called cars. We know who's using parking, that would be called cars. So why doesn't the value of the parking match the value of the roads? That's a subsidy. So what happens is when you're not taxing the parking enough, you're raiding the building budget to pay off those roads. So that means you don't have money for the art teacher, the affordable housing program, or whatever. It's because you're spending it else other places. There's basically somebody coming in and taking your money out of your savings account because they have to buy things. You know, they basically have enough roads to go from Peoria to Vancouver. Could you imagine if Peoria announced building a road to Vancouver? Like, who would vote for that? But again, we have these death by 1,000 cuts without ever paying attention to this stuff, and no one adds it up. And we certainly don't do the geospatial analysis to understand how it operates. I know this joke only works for people over the age of 35. I got that, but trying to make a point here. Map it, put it in a model, get what's going on, see what's going on. This is the stormwater, the sewerage system in Eugene. So this is all the different sewerage basins inside. So each one of these different colors is a standalone trunk system. You can see this neighborhood has no pink things in it. Pink things are lift stations. Lift stations are super expensive. If this one's not, it doesn't have any lift stations, this one's got 8. Shouldn't these people pay a rate higher to man those 8 lift stations? Certainly. They have to maintain them $50,000 a year for each lift station. So why are they all paying the same price? That's a subsidy. So I know we're at 2 o'clock. Let me just jump ahead to close here with a lesson. We have to measure this stuff, and there's crazy things that you're going to see just for fun. In our office, this newspaper article came out in South Florida. South Florida loves talking about their rich people. These are mansions and their tax bills. So we did this as a joke in the office. This is what nerds we are. These are all the tax bills for all of these properties. So in the upper left, you know, this mansion's paying $1 million in property taxes. This mansion's paying 1.5 million because, you know, you need 2 mansions. This one's paying 1.2 million because you need a golf course on the ocean. But you know me, I'm an apples to apples person. These are all different sizes. So per acre, these are the tax yields. So let's just rearrange these based on potency. So the one on the upper left is the most potent. It's also the smallest. The one on the lower right, the golf course one, is actually the least productive. The double mansion somewhere in the middle. So going from the multi-millionaires, the one percenters to the multi-dollar mansions, you know, people like you and me. I don't know if there's any one percenters on this call, but these are the tax bills of middle income stuff in Delray Beach and West Palm Beach. This is the poor African-American neighborhood in West Palm Beach. I used to be a zoning administrator there. This is the tax bill that this house pays, about $1,000 per acre. She's crushing it. So let's take the guy in the middle up here at 77,000. So he's actually more tax productive than the golf course one. He doesn't have an ocean view. He doesn't have a golf course. He doesn't even have a yard. His jacuzzi's in the parking space. He also doesn't even have a street. His property is on the oldest block, so he has low infrastructure. Let's take a look at these things. Townhouses. In a lot of communities, these are illegal. They don't have any setbacks. They're too close to the road, whatever. But they're paying, you know, pretty handsome taxes per acre. They're actually more productive than the double mansion that has a lot more road to it and surface area. So again, understand productivity. This is usually where I end the show, but you know, we did some searching around. This is Rush Limbaugh. And by the way, we grabbed Jimmy Buffett's property as well, just to make sure that we're hitting equal sides of the political spectrum. But Rush Limbaugh is getting about a 50% discount in his market value to his property value that's taxable, right? So he's paying about 50% on value. Taking a look at this house, this is her deduction. She gets less than 1%. So we need to ask ourselves, is this fair? Is this what the intention of policy is? Does this work for your community? And make sure that you do the math and make a value judgment about, is this fair for folks? And just be honest about the math. And let's do the math to see this stuff. Now, what's crazy about her house at $32,000 of taxes per acre, she's actually more productive than Mar-a-Lago. Again, don't hate the player, hate the game. You need to understand the game, and we need to be like geo accountants, understand how this works. Now, your accountant's not going to judge you on things. I'm not judging anybody on what's happening there. If you're going to tax me less for something, I'm going to do it. There's an incentive baked into the system, and your accountant doesn't care if you buy a boat, right? Your accountant cares if you can afford a boat. So put the numbers on a map. Don't judge. You know, this isn't a blame game. This is about understanding what's going on and visually representing it so people understand it. Read Chuck's book, get the book. There's a lot of value in what Strong Towns is doing. I want to thank you all for being members and following what's going on and being part of the math.